Not today, boys. This flight's private. The words hit like a slap wrapped in politeness. Jalen and DeAndre Coleman stood on the tarmac under the Georgia sun, passports in hand, their father's Gulfstream jet gleaming just 50 feet away. The pilot, Chad Whitmore, stood at the foot of the boarding stairs, arms crossed, sunglasses reflecting nothing but dismissal. He wasn't asking a question. He was delivering a verdict. Jalen frowned, confusion spreading across his face. "Sir, this is our flight." Whitmore didn't even blink. "I don't think so. The owner's guests are expected shortly, and you two," his voice tilted sharp with judgment, "don't fit that list." DeAndre's jaw clenched. He had his father's temper, but his mother's restraint. "We are the owner's guests," he said slowly. "Our dad owns that jet." Whitmore's smirk widened, the kind of smirk that said he'd heard every excuse in the book. "Uh-huh, sure he does, and I'm the president." He gestured toward the security vehicle parked nearby. "You two can wait there until I confirm." The twins exchanged a look. They were 17, old enough to know what this was. Old enough to feel the sting of being mistaken for trespassers on something that was literally their family's property. Jalen tried again. "Our dad's name is Derek Coleman. He's on his way. We're supposed to pre-board." Whitmore's tone hardened. "Listen, son, I don't care what name you toss around. Until I see proof, you're not setting foot on this plane." From behind him, Megan Riley, the flight attendant, stepped forward, whispering just loud enough to be heard. "We've had people sneak onto jets before. Better safe than sorry." Better safe than sorry. That phrase, polite, hollow, and poisonous, hung in the air. DeAndre exhaled through his nose. "Safe from what exactly?" Whitmore didn't answer. Instead, he signaled to the ground supervisor, Travis Blake, who approached with a clipboard and the slow, practiced authority of someone who believed their clipboard made them infallible. "Problem here, Captain?" Travis asked. "Two unauthorized minors trying to access the Whitmore charter," Chad said, "claiming their family." Travis looked the twins up and down. "You got IDs?" Jalen handed over both passports without hesitation. Travis flipped them open, scanning the pages with exaggerated slowness. "Coleman," he read aloud, as if the name itself were suspicious. "Where's the owner's authorization letter?" "We don't need one," Jalen said, keeping his voice steady. "It's our family's plane." Travis raised an eyebrow. "Uh-huh. And where's your father now?" DeAndre replied, "Inside the terminal. He was checking in with operations." "Convenient," Travis muttered. "You two just happened to show up before him. No crew, no ground escort, no paperwork. Doesn't sound right." "Maybe because you didn't ask," DeAndre snapped. That was enough to make Travis lower the clipboard, his smile gone. "Watch your tone, kid. You're already trespassing." A few steps away, Amber Johnson, a freelance journalist waiting to board another jet, stopped scrolling her phone. Something in the way the pilot's voice sliced through the humid air caught her attention. She started recording. Jalen tried once more, calm but firm. "Please call Derek Coleman. He owns Coleman Aerodyne. This is his jet. Registration N2116DC. Travis chuckled. "Cute. You even memorized the tail number. You been practicing that line?" The twins stood silent. The only sound was the buzz of the engines idling nearby. Then, from the glass doors of the private terminal, their father appeared, Derek Coleman, mid-40s, tall, commanding, wearing a navy polo and sunglasses. He looked like quiet money, no flash, no entourage, just certainty in motion. He waved at his sons. But by the time he reached them, it was already too late. Travis had stepped closer to the twins. "If you don't clear off the tarmac in 30 seconds, I'll have airport security escort you off property." Jalen turned toward his father's approaching figure. "Dad," Travis cut him off, "don't talk back." That's when Derek's voice cut through the heat. "They don't have to." Every head turned. Derek walked right up to the boarding stairs, his tone cool as ice. "What seems to be the issue here?" Whitmore straightened. "Sir, I'm the pilot of this aircraft, and these two young men were attempting to board without authorization. I was just following safety procedure." "Safety," Derek repeated quietly, his jaw tightening. Interesting word choice. Travis stepped in quickly. Sir, if this is your aircraft, we'll just need proof of ownership before they can proceed." Derek raised an eyebrow. Proof? Yes, sir. Paperwork, identification. Derek smiled slightly, a dangerous smile. The jet has my initials painted on its tail. The hangar lease is in my company's name, and the flight plan was filed under Coleman Holdings. You're standing on my property while accusing my sons of trespassing. Megan's face drained of color. Travis's smirk evaporated. Chad shifted uncomfortably. Derek didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Tell me, he asked evenly, what exactly made you think they didn't belong? No one answered. Was it the color of their skin? Derek continued. The sneakers, the hoodies, the fact that they weren't escorted by someone who looks like you? Travis stammered. Sir, you just profiled my sons, Derek said, on private property, while representing my company. Megan whispered, We didn't know, sir. No, you didn't care to know. Amber's camera kept rolling. The red light blinked steadily, catching every word. Chad tried to recover. Mr. Coleman, I assure you this was just a misunderstanding. We take security seriously. Good, Derek said coldly. Then you'll understand why you're being recorded right now for violating both FAA policy and federal anti-discrimination law. Travis blinked. What? I have the airport authority on speed dial, Derek said. You have 10 seconds to step away from my sons before this becomes an incident report with your names attached. Travis took 2 quick steps back. DeAndre crossed his arms. Now you want to back up. Son, Derek said quietly, let them speak for themselves. They just showed us who they are. Amber looked up from her phone. Mr. Coleman, would you like to make a statement for the record? Derek turned to her. Not yet. I want them to finish digging the hole first. Chad cleared his throat. Sir, I hope we can move past this and... Move past it? Derek interrupted. You humiliated my children on the tarmac of a company I built from scratch, and you want to move past it? Whitmore went silent. Derek turned toward his sons. Go inside the jet. Jalen hesitated. Dad, are you sure? Yes, it's yours as much as mine. Get comfortable. The twins climbed the stairs under the weight of every staring eye. When they disappeared inside, Derek faced the crew again. Now, he said softly, we're going to talk about consequences. But before anyone could speak, the terminal doors burst open. Linda Barrett, the airport's operations manager, hurried toward them, radio in hand. Mr. Coleman, my apologies, she started, her voice strained. I just received word of an altercation. Derek cut her off with a raised hand. Your staff detained my sons on my jet. I'd like to know why. Linda's eyes flicked toward Travis and Chad, both suddenly frozen. I'll need to review the report. Derek tilted his head. You'll need to do more than that. Amber's recording light glowed brighter in the afternoon sun. A few airport employees had gathered nearby, pretending not to listen. Derek took a deep breath, his voice calm but lethal. 9 minutes. That's how long it took your people to profile, insult, and threaten 2 kids for existing in the wrong place. So I'll give you the same 9 minutes to fix it before this becomes national news. Linda blinked, realizing she was no longer in control. Mr. Coleman, please. No, he said flatly. You please. Explain to me how this happens at a private terminal where every passenger is vetted in advance. Explain why your captain decided my sons didn't look wealthy enough to fly on their own plane. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was suffocating. Travis swallowed hard. Sir, I made an assumption. You did, Derek replied, and now you can assume you're unemployed. Amber's eyebrows lifted. Is that official? It's documented, Derek said, and it's only the beginning. He looked at Linda. Get your director on the line. Tell them Derek Coleman is requesting an immediate audit of every staff member cleared for this terminal. Every single one. Because if this happened to my sons, it's happened before, and I intend to find out how many times. Linda froze. Travis's clipboard slipped from his hands and hit the ground. The sound echoed across the runway, sharp, final, like the closing of a door. And that was just the beginning. Because within minutes, Derek Coleman wasn't just defending his sons. He was about to dismantle an entire system that thought it could decide who was worthy of respect. 9 minutes earlier, Derek Coleman had been inside the executive terminal, shaking hands with an operations director who didn't realize who he was talking to. Beautiful day to fly, the man had said, glancing down at Derek's simple attire, navy polo, jeans, clean sneakers. Private charter, I assume? Derek smiled politely. You could say that. He didn't elaborate because he never needed to. His presence usually did the explaining. Years in the Air Force had trained him to move with quiet precision, to command without fanfare. After retiring as a decorated pilot, he'd started small leasing one aircraft for corporate travel under his own company, Coleman Aerodyne. 2 decades later, he owned a fleet that serviced Fortune 500 executives, entertainers, and diplomats across the country. He didn't rent planes. He built an empire around them. But Derek never forgot the reason behind his empire. When he was 12, he and his mother had been kicked off a connecting flight in Dallas. The gate agent claimed their tickets were invalid. His mother, dressed in a hotel-maid uniform, had quietly begged for a seat. The man behind the counter smirked and said, "You can wait for standby." Derek had watched his mother's shoulders shake as they sat overnight in the terminal, humiliated. That night, he promised himself he'd never let anyone talk to his family like that again. So when he heard raised voices outside, when his son's names came through the radio on the front desk, every instinct in him reawakened. The executive director had been mid-sentence when Derek excused himself. "If you'll pardon me," he said evenly, "something outside needs my attention." Now, standing on the tarmac, watching his sons endure the same treatment his mother once had, Derek's past and present collided. He wasn't the boy from Dallas anymore. He was the man who owned the runway. Inside the jet, Jalen sat by the window, fists balled in his lap. "They really thought we were lying," he muttered. DeAndre leaned back, shaking his head. "Nah, they didn't think. They saw 2 black teens near a private jet and made up a story." The hum of the idle engines filled the silence. Jalen glanced through the glass, watching his father talk to the crew, every movement controlled, deliberate, dangerous. "You think he's mad?" Jalen asked. DeAndre smirked. "Mad? He's about to educate them." And he was right. Outside, Linda Barrett was still scrambling to contain the situation. She'd been in aviation for 30 years, but nothing in her management manual covered this kind of storm. "Mr. Coleman," she began again, "I want to sincerely apologize for this misunderstanding. I can assure you—" Derek cut her off. "Stop calling it that. Sir, misunderstanding implies confusion. There was none. This was arrogance." Amber Johnson's camera trembled slightly in her hand. She whispered to her viewers, "You guys are not going to believe this. The man they tried to block is the owner, like literally the boss of the people doing the blocking." Her comment section exploded. "Typical story playing out in real time. He's about to end careers." "Good, let them learn." Derek turned toward Travis Blake. "How long have you been here?" 8 years, sir." "And in that time, how many black families have you escorted to private jets?" Travis hesitated. I don't track that." "You don't need to," Derek said. "Your reaction tells me everything." Whitmore's jaw flexed. "Mr. Coleman, with all due respect—" "There it is," Derek interrupted. "With all due respect. The universal translation for, I've already disrespected you, now let me justify it." Travis swallowed. "Sir, if you'll allow me to explain—" "You've explained enough," Derek said. "You saw 2 kids who didn't match your imagination of who belongs here. You didn't ask questions. You assumed guilt." Linda cleared her throat nervously. "We can de-escalate this." Derek turned his gaze on her. "You should have done that before your pilot started grandstanding." At that exact moment, Tyrone Davis, an aircraft mechanic working a nearby hangar, stopped tightening a bolt and looked over. He recognized Derek instantly. He'd seen him on the cover of Aviation Business Weekly, the man who had turned a single charter operation into a billion-dollar enterprise. Tyrone stepped forward. "Mr. Coleman," he called out. Derek turned slightly. "I saw what happened, sir," Tyrone said. "They stopped your boys before they even reached the stairs. You want a written statement, I'll give it." Linda froze. The witnesses were multiplying. Derek nodded once. "Appreciate that." 20 minutes earlier, in the terminal lounge, Jalen had been excited. This was supposed to be his and DeAndre's first solo trip to D.C. for a youth leadership summit. Their father had surprised them with the flight. "You've both earned it," Derek had said. Your mother and I couldn't be prouder." He'd watched them light up, arguing over who got the window seat, laughing about who would order snacks first. It was supposed to be a simple morning. And now here they were, two teenagers reduced to suspects on a strip of pavement they practically owned. Linda's voice broke through the tension. "Mr. Coleman, please, I'll make this right." Derek nodded slightly. "You will, but not by talking." He pulled out his phone and tapped once. "Carla," he said when the line picked up. A crisp voice answered. "Yes, sir." "Begin internal review protocol under Coleman Aerodyne. Record this as a Level 1 discrimination incident. Attach all available footage." "Yes, sir," Carla replied. "Do you want public relations notified?" "Not yet, I want truth before headlines." Amber lowered her phone. "Did he just say internal review? Like a company investigation?" A bystander whispered, "He owns the company. This whole terminal probably runs under his contracts." Amber's audience comments exploded again. Derek turned back to the pilot. "You said you were just following procedure. Tell me what part of procedure involves confiscating people's dignity before verifying facts." Chad Whitmore straightened. "Sir, I was ensuring safety. We've had unauthorized passengers before." "Show me the incident reports," Derek said. "What?" "The last 3 times that happened. Let's see if any of those passengers were white." Chad blinked. "That's irrelevant." "No," Derek replied sharply. "That's data." For the first time, Linda Barrett looked down, realizing the man in front of her didn't just have power, he had proof. Derek took a step closer. "Here's what's going to happen. You, Captain Whitmore, are relieved of duty pending investigation. Travis, you'll surrender your badge. And Ms. Barrett, call your director. Tell them Derek Coleman is enacting immediate audit authority per Contract Clause 9.3. Failure to comply will result in breach penalties." Linda paled. "That's Mr. Coleman. That's not necessary." "Oh, it's absolutely necessary." Derek glanced toward the jet, where his son's silhouettes were visible through the tinted glass. "Because my kids deserve better than excuses wrapped in uniforms." Amber's camera captured it all, the calm precision, the quiet wrath, the moral authority that came from someone who'd built everything people once told him he couldn't. Tyrone, still standing by the hangar, muttered under his breath, "They messed with the wrong man." Inside the jet, DeAndre looked out the window. "You think he's going to fire them all?" Jalen nodded slowly. "Dad doesn't yell. He just removes people." DeAndre smirked. "Yeah, that's worse." Jalen leaned back, watching his father from behind the glass. The man who had taught them to never let anger speak before truth was now showing them what power looked like when truth had backup. And on the tarmac, that truth was spreading like wildfire. A woman in a beige business suit, Samantha Ortiz, head of public relations for another airline, had stepped out of the adjacent lounge to watch. She recognized Derek instantly. "That's Coleman," she whispered to her assistant. "They're finished." Amber's phone buzzed with a flood of comments. "This is going viral. The calmest destruction ever." "That's how you do it." Linda tried one last time. "Mr. Coleman, please. This could all be a misunderstanding." Derek's eyes didn't soften. "You keep using that word, and every time you do, it makes you smaller." He turned toward Amber. "Keep recording. The world needs to see what accountability looks like when you stop waiting for apologies." Amber nodded, her camera steady. Derek checked his watch. 8 minutes left, he said quietly. But this wasn't just about time. It was about history repeating itself, and this time he was ready. Because the man they tried to embarrass had spent his life turning humiliation into empire, and now that empire was about to strike back. The terminal was silent except for the faint echo of jet engines and the sound of fear taking shape. Derek Coleman stood in the center of that silence, his presence sharper than anger. He didn't shout, didn't move fast, didn't raise his arms the way people do when they're trying to prove control. He simply stood there, measured and deliberate, the way a man stands when he knows he's right and doesn't need anyone's permission to show it. Every second stretched like a warning. The pilot, Chad Whitmore, was no longer smirking. The clipboard in Travis Blake's hands trembled slightly. Even Linda Barrett, the airport manager, seemed to shrink behind her radio. For years, she had run this terminal with unchallenged authority, but at that moment, she looked like someone standing too close to the edge of a cliff. Derek's voice cut through the heavy air. "You know what the most dangerous kind of bias is?" His tone was calm, conversational even. "It's the kind that hides behind politeness, the kind that smiles while it shuts the door in your face." He wasn't just talking to them. He was talking to the entire system that let this moment exist. My sons didn't threaten anyone. They didn't break a rule. They walked toward a jet with our family's name painted on its tail, and you decided they didn't belong there. Travis's voice came out thin. "Sir, I was only following procedure." "Procedure," Derek repeated slowly, like the word itself deserved interrogation. "Tell me exactly where in your procedure it says to treat 2 children like suspects before you ask a single question." Travis looked down. "It's not written, it's understood," Derek said. "Unwritten rules, those are always the most dangerous kind." Amber Johnson, still streaming live from her phone, caught the moment in perfect clarity. Her viewers were typing comments so fast they blurred the screen. People watching from thousands of miles away felt the tension ripple through their devices. The pilot shifted his stance, trying to reclaim authority. "Mr. Coleman," he began, "we take security very seriously. This was about safety." "Whose safety?" Derek asked quietly. "Because it clearly wasn't my sons. They were the only ones treated like intruders. You didn't secure the plane, you secured your assumptions." Linda finally stepped forward. Her voice wavered between apology and damage control. "Mr. Coleman, I'll handle this internally. Let's not escalate." Derek's eyes met hers, and she stopped mid-sentence. "You're too late," he said. "It escalated the moment your employees decided appearance was proof of guilt." A few employees had gathered at the far end of the terminal, pretending to check equipment but clearly listening. The silence between Derek's sentences wasn't empty. It was deliberate. Every pause was another opportunity for someone to speak, to defend themselves, to show decency. No one did. He took one slow step closer to the pilot. "How long have you been flying, Captain?" 20 years, Whitmore said cautiously. "Then you know responsibility," Derek said. "You know what happens when arrogance gets into a cockpit. One mistake, one bad assumption, and people die. But arrogance on the ground? It kills something else: trust, reputation, humanity." Whitmore's throat tightened. "Sir, You what?" Derek asked. "Didn't think, didn't notice, didn't care?" Linda's radio crackled, but she didn't answer. Amber's viewers were glued to their screens. Someone typed, "He's tearing them apart with truth alone." Derek took a breath. "You called my sons unauthorized. Do you know what that word means? It means someone doesn't have permission. Permission to walk, to exist, to belong. You used that word like a weapon. And the worst part? You didn't even realize how normal it sounded coming out of your mouth." Travis tried to salvage the situation. "We didn't mean to disrespect anyone." "But you did," Derek said. "And now you'll deal with the reality of what meaning well costs." He turned slightly toward Linda. "How many complaints has this terminal received for discriminatory treatment?" "I'd have to check the records," she stammered. "Don't bother," Derek said. "I already know. 6, all dismissed. All marked resolved without investigation. Does that sound familiar?" Her eyes widened. "How did you—" "Because this isn't new," he said. "It's just the first time someone with power got tired of watching it happen quietly." The sound of a jet taking off nearby rumbled through the glass walls. Derek didn't flinch. He turned to Amber. "Keep recording," he said. "No one hides behind silence today." Amber nodded, her phone steady. "Already rolling," she said. The crowd watching through the terminal windows had grown. Business travelers, staff, passengers waiting for their flights, all drawn by the sight of a man dismantling discrimination without theatrics. Derek glanced at his watch. 9 minutes, he murmured. That's how long this took. He looked at Travis again. "In those 9 minutes, you managed to turn an act of hospitality into humiliation. You didn't ask for ID. You didn't call anyone to verify. You just assumed. Travis swallowed hard. Sir, please, I understand now. No, Derek said. You don't understand yet. Understanding means changing what happens next. And that's not your decision anymore, it's mine. He motioned toward the terminal office behind Linda. You have a company directory in there, don't you? Get me your regional director on the phone. Linda hesitated. Mr. Heller, he's busy right now. Not anymore, Derek said. Linda fumbled with her radio, whispering hurriedly. Within minutes, a tall man in a gray suit appeared from the upper office level, adjusting his tie as he walked. Douglas Heller, Regional Director of Southern Operations. He looked confused until his eyes landed on Derek. Recognition hit immediately. Derek, he said, trying to smile. Good to see you again. What's all this about? Derek's voice was polite but sharp. What it's always about, Doug. Your people mistreated mine, and now you're here to explain why you keep hiring arrogance in uniform. Heller's smile faltered. Now hold on, I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. Stop using that word, Derek said. It's a shield for people who don't want accountability. Amber's viewers typed furiously. He's confronting the director himself. This is history in real time. Heller straightened, trying to reassert control. You can't just barge in here and disrupt airport operations. I can, Derek said, because I own the fleet that keeps your operations profitable. Every plane, every fuel contract, every hangar lease tied to my company stops today, effective immediately. Heller froze. You wouldn't do that. I already did, Derek replied. You'll receive written notice within the hour. The shock rippled through the room like turbulence. Linda's face drained of color. The pilot took an involuntary step back. Travis looked like he wanted to disappear. Derek's voice remained steady. I've spent 20 years building something clean in a system built on quiet exclusion. And if burning one terminal down is the cost of cleaning it, so be it. Heller sputtered. You're overreacting. Am I? Derek asked. When was the last time a white teenager was accused of stealing his own father's jet? When was the last time you stopped someone who looked like you and demanded proof of ownership? The question hung there unanswered. Heller looked around the room as if searching for someone to back him up. No one moved. The authority he'd relied on his whole career was evaporating. Derek didn't need to raise his voice. The silence did the work for him. He turned back toward the window, where his sons were watching from inside the jet. He could see their faces pressed to the glass, eyes wide, not with fear, but pride. He motioned for them to come out. The door opened, and they stepped down the stairs, walking side by side. The terminal workers stared as the teenagers joined their father. These, Derek said, his hand resting gently on their shoulders, are the people you decided didn't belong. Straight A students, volunteers. One of them plans to be a pilot, the other an engineer. They represent everything this industry pretends to value: discipline, aspiration, excellence. But to you, they were just two kids in hoodies. DeAndre's voice was quiet but steady. We just wanted to board our flight, sir. Jalen added, we didn't even argue. We just waited. Derek nodded. That's the saddest part. They've already learned how to make themselves small to survive moments like this. Heller tried one last time to deflect. Mr. Coleman, we'll handle this appropriately. You already had your chance, Derek said. Now I'll handle it. He took out his phone, dialed a number, and said into the receiver, Carla, initiate audit protocol for Atlanta South Terminal. Record it as Level 1 discrimination review. Notify legal and PR. Timestamp it now. Carla's crisp voice came through the speaker. Confirmed. Recording initiated. Derek ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. There. Official. Irreversible. A murmur swept through the gathered employees. Amber's camera captured everything: the professionalism, the weight of calm retribution. It was the kind of scene people would study later, wondering how authority could look so quiet and still cut so deep. Heller looked defeated. What do you want from us, Derek? Accountability, Derek said simply. Not excuses, not sensitivity workshops, real measurable change. Amber's stream count crossed 50,000 live viewers. Comments flooded in from across the country. People weren't just watching a confrontation, they were watching what reform looks like in human form. Derek looked around one last time. "You've all learned a lesson today," he said. "Not about power, about perception. You thought you could read people by sight. You never learned to read consequences." He turned to his sons. "We're done here." They started walking toward the jet, every step echoing like punctuation marks at the end of an era. As they passed, employees stepped aside instinctively. The air had shifted. The authority that once belonged to uniforms now belonged to truth. Just before boarding, Derek stopped and looked back. "One more thing," he said to Linda. "The next time a young man of color walks into your terminal, remember this day. Remember that the person you dismiss might own everything you're standing on." Linda nodded wordlessly. Travis lowered his head. The pilot stood rigid, unable to look anyone in the eye. Derek turned away, his sons following close behind. They climbed the jet steps and disappeared inside. When the door closed, Amber whispered into her phone, "And that's how you end an empire built on assumptions." The viewers flooded her comments with applause emojis and messages like, "This is bigger than a jet." That man just rewrote professionalism. Inside the jet, DeAndre sat by the window watching his father through the reflection of the glass. "You didn't yell once," he said quietly. "You didn't even sound mad." Derek smiled faintly. "Anger's for people without proof," Jalen asked. "You think they'll change?" "They won't have a choice," Derek said. The engines roared to life, a low thunder rolling beneath them. As the plane began to taxi, Derek looked out at the shrinking figures on the tarmac, the same people who, an hour ago, had thought they could decide who belonged. Now they stood motionless, watching the jet lift into the air. It wasn't just a departure, it was a statement. At 30,000 feet, with the city lights glowing far below, Derek finally exhaled. He looked at his sons and said, "You saw what happened today?" Jalen nodded. "Yeah. That's how you handle injustice," Derek said softly. "You don't curse it, you correct it." The boys exchanged a glance, half in awe, half in understanding. They had witnessed something irreversible the moment their father turned humiliation into education. Down on the ground, the video would spread, the comments would multiply, and the narrative would twist and expand. But up in the sky, the truth was simpler. A father had defended his family, not with rage, but with reality. And in doing so, he had proven something that the world was about to learn the hard way. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply refuses to move. That night, in the quiet of his home office, Derek replayed none of it. He didn't need to. The day had spoken for itself. Tomorrow, the world would call it an incident. Weeks later, they'd call it a movement. But for him, it would always be just one thing, a line finally drawn between dignity and permission. And that line, once drawn, would never be crossed again. By the time the sun dipped behind the Atlanta skyline, the story had already escaped the airport. What had started as a confrontation between a pilot and two teenagers now pulsed across every screen in America. A stranger's phone had captured 9 minutes of quiet destruction, a father dismantling arrogance without ever raising his voice, and those 9 minutes were rewriting the rules of corporate silence. Within hours, major outlets had taken notice. The clip of Derek Coleman standing on the tarmac while the staff who profiled his sons froze in disbelief had spread across social media with the caption, "The calmest reckoning you'll ever see." By midnight, it was trending in 5 countries. The words "private jet profiling" flashed across news tickers and talk show banners. But Derek wasn't glued to screens or phones. He was still in motion, still thinking in systems, not emotions. Inside his jet, the hum of the engines was soft, steady, grounding. Jalen sat near the window, staring out at the clouds that stretched endlessly in every direction. DeAndre scrolled through his phone, watching clips of their father that millions were now dissecting in real time. Derek sat across from them, reading the audit report Carla had already started compiling. He didn't need to watch the video. He had lived it. He knew how it would look: measured, contained, deliberate, the way he always handled injustice, with evidence instead of outrage. "Dad," Jalen said quietly, "they're saying you might sue." Derek looked up from his tablet. "I don't need a lawsuit to make change." DeAndre leaned forward. "Then what are you going to do?" "I'm going to do what they never expected," Derek said. "I'm going to teach them how to fix it." When the jet touched down in Atlanta, reporters were already waiting outside the hangar. Derek didn't stop to answer questions. He walked his son straight to the car and told his driver to head home. On the way, his phone buzzed nonstop: missed calls from news anchors, civil rights lawyers, executives he hadn't spoken to in years. He let them ring. This wasn't the time for performance. It was time for precision. The next morning, Carla arrived at his office with 3 printed binders and a USB drive. Her efficiency was quiet but absolute. "We've got footage from 4 different witnesses," she said. "Amber Johnson's live stream is the main source. The internet's dissecting every frame." "Let them," Derek said. "The truth doesn't need editing." Carla placed the audit file on his desk. "There's more. 6 prior complaints at that terminal, all dismissed by management. 2 involved minors. 3 involved guests of color. 1 was buried under an internal memo labeled "Resolved pending further inquiry." No record of follow-up. Derek leaned back in his chair. "Then it's not an isolated event. It's a structure." Carla nodded. "Exactly, and now the structure's shaking." By noon, the footage had reached mainstream television. Every network ran the same 9-minute clip: the tarmac, the confrontation, the line that had already become legend. "You can ban my sons from your plane, but you can't ban them from the sky." Commentators debated whether Derek's response was too severe, whether firing employees on the spot was justified. Others countered that injustice doesn't wait for board meetings. The phrase "Coleman moment" began appearing in hashtags and op-eds. At lunch, Derek met with his communications and legal teams. The conference room was silent except for the sound of papers shuffling. "We're not issuing a PR apology," he said firmly. "We're not positioning this as anger. We're positioning it as reform." His lawyer, James Porter, adjusted his glasses. "The terminal's management company reached out this morning. They want to arrange a settlement." "I'm not selling silence," Derek said. "They can keep their checkbook." Carla looked up from her laptop. "Then what do you want them to do?" "I want them to rebuild," Derek said. "In public. Every contract we have with that terminal is suspended. Every staff member who's ever received a bias complaint will be reviewed, and we'll fund third-party audits so they can't bury it again." That afternoon, Amber Johnson released her edited version of the live stream. Her narration framed the story with one line that resonated everywhere. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He just made the system see itself. Within hours, her video hit 10 million views. Students shared it in classrooms. Business executives forwarded it in company group chats. Pilots and mechanics began posting their own stories of profiling and mistreatment they'd seen and stayed quiet about. Derek didn't respond publicly. He let the momentum build naturally. He understood that outrage has a lifespan, but truth, when handled correctly, sustains itself. By the 3rd day, the fallout had become federal. The Federal Aviation Administration issued a formal statement announcing an internal review into bias indicators within private charter operations. CNN invited Derek to appear live. He declined. "I don't need to explain what everyone already saw," he told Carla. "They need to ask themselves why it looked familiar." At home that evening, the family gathered around the dinner table. Renee, who had avoided social media for years, finally turned on the television. Every channel featured her husband's face. She reached for his hand. "You've started something you can't stop now," she said quietly. "I don't want to stop it," Derek replied. "I want to make it permanent." Jalen looked up from his plate. "Dad, people online are calling you a hero." Derek smiled faintly. "Heroes act without choices. I made one, and I'll keep making it until the system doesn't need reminders." The next morning, a call came from Washington. A senior aide to Senator Reid requested Derek's presence at a committee hearing on discrimination in private travel. "The senator watched your video," the aide said. "He wants your insight." Derek didn't hesitate. "I'll be there." When he landed in D.C., reporters were waiting again, but this time their tone was different. They weren't chasing scandal, they were chasing direction. The headlines had shifted from outrage to solutions. Derek walked through the Capitol steps with quiet confidence, his sons beside him in matching suits. Inside the hearing, cameras flashed, but Derek spoke as if they weren't there. He told the senators exactly what he'd told everyone else. "You can't train respect into policy, but you can measure accountability. Start there." His words hit harder than any viral clip. When he finished, one senator leaned back and said softly, "Mr. Coleman, you've just written the blueprint." That night, Derek returned to Atlanta and called a meeting at headquarters. "This is where we take control of the narrative," he told Carla. "We'll release our own initiative, our rules, our standards, something no one can ignore or spin." Carla's eyes lit up. "You already have a name?" He nodded. "The Coleman Standard." Over the next 72 hours, every department at Coleman Aerodyne worked around the clock. They drafted new training protocols, redesigned internal complaint systems, and built a digital platform for public transparency. Every audit would be visible to customers and partners. Every infraction would carry consequences. There would be no more quiet cover-ups, no hidden memos. Meanwhile, the terminal where the incident began was almost unrecognizable. Security badges had been revoked. Employees were undergoing emergency retraining. Linda Barrett's office sat empty, blinds drawn. Travis Blake and Captain Whitmore were under investigation. Travelers who once walked through the marble hallways without a second thought now looked at every staff interaction with scrutiny. The air of exclusivity had been replaced by an air of accountability. 3 weeks after the confrontation, Derek's quiet war had changed the private travel industry. Rival companies began issuing new policies mirroring his. The FAA publicly credited him for bringing overdue attention to structural inequities. Newspapers began using the phrase Coleman effect to describe corporate reform triggered by viral exposure. For most people, it was the end of the story. For Derek, it was only the midpoint. Late one night, as the city slept, he sat in his study surrounded by news clippings and reports. Renee walked in, leaned against the doorway, and watched him silently for a moment. "You're thinking again," she said softly. "Always," he said. "I keep wondering how many other fathers had moments like this and no one ever believed them." She nodded. "And now they do." Derek looked out the window at the skyline, the towers lit like quiet sentinels. "Change doesn't come from fury," he said. "It comes from fatigue. Enough people got tired of pretending this wasn't happening." Renee smiled faintly. "And you gave them permission to stop pretending." At that moment, his phone buzzed. A message from Carla read, "FAA Director confirmed. They're adopting the Coleman Standard as a national pilot program." Derek exhaled slowly. The moment he had fought for was now institutional. But he didn't celebrate. He just sat there, thinking of his sons. The next generation wouldn't inherit silence. They'd inherit proof. The week after the hearing in Washington felt unreal. Derek Coleman had expected fallout. He hadn't expected transformation. What began as a humiliating confrontation on a private runway had become the spark for a national movement. The headlines weren't fading, they were multiplying. Every major newspaper had run an editorial about what they called the Coleman Standard, but to Derek, it was never about a name. It was about making sure what happened to Jalen and DeAndre never happened again to anyone, anywhere, in any industry. In the first few days, he barely slept. Calls came from airlines, universities, advocacy groups, and reporters from countries he had never visited. Everyone wanted a quote, a partnership, a reaction. But Derek stayed disciplined. "We move quietly," he told his team. "Noise fades. Structure lasts." At Coleman Aerodyne headquarters, the staff worked under that single line written on the whiteboard. Build something that outlives outrage. Carla coordinated the rollout of new compliance policies. James Porter, the legal counsel, refined the contract language that would bind every partner terminal to anti-bias transparency. Derek spent hours on the phone with FAA directors, proposing a collaboration model that would merge private ethics with federal oversight. He didn't shout or demand. He reasoned, explained, persuaded. His calmness carried more authority than threats ever could. When the official press conference arrived 2 weeks later, it wasn't held at a hotel ballroom but inside the National Aviation Center's main atrium. The audience was a mosaic of journalists, pilots, students, and corporate leaders. A huge banner hung behind the podium. The Coleman Standard Respect is the runway. Derek stepped forward in a charcoal suit flanked by Jalen and DeAndre. The twins looked composed but slightly nervous. They were 17 and the world now knew their names. He began simply. 2 weeks ago, my sons were told they didn't belong on an aircraft with our family's name on it. What you saw wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a mirror. It showed how comfort disguises bias, how policy excuses prejudice, and how silence protects both. Today, that ends. The microphones clicked. Cameras flashed. Derek's voice stayed even. Starting now, every company affiliated with Coleman Aerodyne will adopt measurable equity standards. Every complaint will be logged publicly. Every review will be accessible. The goal isn't punishment, it's proof. Because systems don't change with slogans. They change with data and accountability. He paused and looked at his sons. No one should need wealth to be treated with dignity. If respect depends on ownership, then it isn't respect, it's negotiation. The applause began slowly, then rose until the atrium vibrated. Jalen blinked hard, trying not to cry. DeAndre smiled for the first time in weeks. After the conference, reporters swarmed. "Mr. Coleman, how will you enforce compliance?" one shouted. "We won't enforce," he replied. "We'll demonstrate. Example is the strongest pressure there is." Another asked if he sought revenge. "Revenge fixes pride," he said. "Reform fixes the future." That night, cable news carried his entire speech uninterrupted. Analysts called it historic. Activists called it overdue. One commentator said, "He turned humiliation into legislation without ever filing a lawsuit." Derek muted the television halfway through. He wasn't interested in commentary. He was already sketching Phase 2. The next morning, he unveiled the Coleman Flight Academy, a scholarship initiative to train underrepresented youth in aviation. It offered full funding for flight school, mechanical training, and aeronautical engineering degrees. The idea had come to him after reading the letters pouring in from teenagers who said they dreamed of flying but couldn't afford the license fees. He told Carla, "If they can't get in through the gate, we'll build them another gate." Within 48 hours, applications overwhelmed the servers. Essays arrived from every state, young men and women describing how they wanted to change an industry that had never seen them before. Derek read as many as he could personally. Every story felt like fuel. Meanwhile, the fallout at the Atlanta terminal continued. Linda Barrett resigned publicly, writing, "Leadership means noticing before the camera does. I failed to notice." Travis Blake and Captain Whitmore were terminated after the investigation confirmed bias in protocol decisions. FAA inspectors replaced most of the supervisory staff. A new sign appeared above the private flight desk. "All guests welcome." All voices heard. Passengers noticed the difference immediately. The tone had shifted. You could feel respect in the air. For Jalen and DeAndre, school life was changing too. Teachers stopped them in hallways. Classmates asked for interviews. One local news outlet offered them a segment called Youth Voices of Courage. Derek refused on their behalf. "You don't need to become symbols," he told them. "Just keep being examples. Live better than the story they tried to write for you." They understood. Both boys joined the early enrollment program at the Flight Academy. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same runway that once rejected them now launched their training. Across the country, other corporations began calling their HR departments to discuss adopting the Coleman Standard. Airlines, shipping companies, even a luxury car manufacturer requested consultation. Derek approved partnerships but refused licensing fees. "If change needs profit, it isn't real," he said. His advisors argued that he could make millions turning his framework into proprietary software. He shook his head. "You can't trademark decency." The viral momentum didn't slow. Amber Johnson released her full-length documentary, 9 minutes, blending the original footage with interviews from witnesses, airport workers, and social commentators. Her narration began, "9 minutes changed a family. 9 minutes changed a system." The film opened with silence, the same silence that followed Derek's words on the tarmac. When it premiered online, 30 million people watched within a week. Viewers posted reactions filled with awe and tears. Teachers used it in civics classes. Corporations screened it during diversity training. Derek watched only once. Halfway through, he turned it off, whispering, "That's enough." Renee understood. Some truths don't need replaying. Months passed. Coleman Aerodyne's valuation doubled, not because of publicity, but because clients trusted integrity. Investors admired a company willing to risk contracts for principle. Even competitors admitted privately that his reforms forced them to evolve. Business analysts coined a new term, the Coleman effect, for the ripple of accountability spreading through industries that had long relied on secrecy. At a private gala hosted by the National Business Aviation Association, Derek received an award for ethical leadership in aviation. When he stepped to the microphone, he spoke without notes. "We don't need more heroes," he said. "We need fewer bystanders. I'd trade every award for one more person who steps forward when it's uncomfortable." The room erupted in applause that felt earned, not polite. Back home in Atlanta, life settled into a gentler rhythm. Derek's mornings began with coffee on the patio, watching the sky as if memorizing its calm. Renee often joined him. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't need to. Their silence had shifted from tension to peace. The twins spent their weekends at flight school, studying navigation charts and aerodynamics. The first time Jalen soloed a small Cessna, Derek stood at the airfield fence, silent tears streaking his face. When DeAndre completed his first cross-country flight, he landed to find his parents waiting with open arms. The sky that once denied them now carried them forward. In corporate circles, the Coleman Standard became permanent policy. The FAA integrated key elements into its certification guidelines. Every charter company operating under federal registration was now required to maintain transparent complaint logs. Airlines began sharing data publicly for the first time in history. The old excuse of isolated incident disappeared from official vocabulary. It was a revolution disguised as regulation. But for Derek, the real victory came quietly. One evening, while reviewing scholarship applications, he came across a letter from a 15-year-old girl named Layla Morrison from Chicago. She wrote, "I saw your sons on TV, and I decided I want to fly too. My teacher said I couldn't because I'm scared of math. I want to prove her wrong. If I get into your program, I'll name my first plane Courage." Derek read it twice, then slid it into a folder labeled Accepted. Months turned to a year. The reforms solidified. Journalists moved on to new stories, but the impact remained. Airports changed. Training manuals changed. Attitudes changed slowly, then all at once. The Colemans' lives returned to quiet normalcy, though normal now meant recognition wherever they went. People would stop Derek at restaurants to thank him. Strangers would salute Jalen and DeAndre at airports. Renee always smiled graciously, but Derek kept his humility. "Don't thank me," he'd say. "Just pay it forward. One afternoon, he received a call from Senator Reid. Congress had just passed the Aviation Equity Act, modeled directly on the Coleman Standard. "You've done it, Derek," the senator said. "It's federal law now." Derek closed his eyes and whispered, "About time." When he hung up, he looked toward the framed photograph of his mother on his office shelf, the woman who once sat stranded overnight at an airport because her ticket was mislabeled. He touched the frame gently. "We fixed it, Mom," he said. "We finally fixed it." That night, a celebration dinner filled their home with laughter and relief. Jalen joked about buying his dad a pilot cap that said CEO of the Sky. DeAndre teased that he'd name his future company Coleman Jr. Airlines. Renee looked at her family and said quietly, "You know what the best part is? We didn't shout anyone down. We showed them up with grace." Derek raised his glass of sparkling water. Grace is the loudest volume there is. Later that evening, after the dishes were cleared and the house fell quiet, Derek stepped outside. The night air was cool, the sky a dark ocean of stars. Somewhere above, aircraft lights blinked red and white, moving like distant fireflies. He thought of every pilot, every passenger, every worker whose life might be a little fairer now because one moment on a runway had refused to stay silent. The world doesn't change through noise, he thought. It changes through proof. A few months later, the FAA invited him to deliver the keynote address at its annual summit. He spoke to an audience of thousands, pilots, engineers, regulators, executives. "Aviation has always been about altitude," he began. "But the real challenge isn't how high we fly, it's how equal the ground looks when we land." The room went completely still. Even the veteran captains leaned forward to listen. "The sky doesn't discriminate," he continued. "Only people do, and people can learn." When he finished, the applause was long, but what mattered more were the letters that followed notes from employees thanking him for giving them the courage to speak up. The transformation was no longer his alone. It belonged to everyone who had seen themselves in that 9-minute clip and decided they were done waiting for fairness. Years later, the story of Derek Coleman and his sons became part of training modules for aviation leadership programs. College students wrote essays about it. Civil rights documentaries cited it as a turning point. The phrase "pulling a Coleman" entered corporate slang to describe taking decisive ethical action in public view. Derek found the expression funny. "If it keeps people honest, I'll take it," he said. By the second anniversary of the incident, Jalen and DeAndre had earned their private pilot licenses. They stood beside their father at a small ceremony as the FAA officially certified the Coleman Standard as a permanent regulatory model. Reporters asked Derek what came next. He smiled. "Next, we fly." That evening, he and Renee returned to the same runway where it all began. The air smelled of jet fuel and spring rain. The hangar lights glowed faintly against the dusk. Derek walked to the spot where the confrontation had taken place 2 years earlier. The memory flashed briefly: Whitmore's smug tone, Travis's clipboard, the disbelief in his son's eyes. But the anger was gone, replaced by something steadier: gratitude. Sometimes change needed humiliation to find its voice. A sleek, new jet waited nearby, freshly painted in silver and blue. On its tail, beneath the registration number, were 4 small words in cursive: "Equal skies begin here." Derek traced the lettering with his fingers and smiled. "That's a good reminder," he said quietly. Renee slipped her hand into his. "You gave the sky back to people who forgot they owned a piece of it," she whispered. He looked at her and nodded. "We just reminded them how to look up." As the engine started, the runway lights flickered alive, stretching into the distance like a path to something eternal. The twins, now certified co-pilots, climbed into the cockpit. Derek and Renee took seats behind them. The aircraft rolled forward, gathering speed. The wheels lifted, and the city fell away beneath them. Through the window, the horizon opened in an expanse of gold and blue, endless and forgiving. Jalen's voice came through the intercom, calm and steady. Altitude 10,000 and climbing. DeAndre added, clear skies ahead. Derek closed his eyes, a quiet smile forming. They were always ahead, he whispered. As the jet soared higher, the world below became small and soft. The airport that once tried to shrink them now looked like a memory, and the sky above looked like justice fulfilled. Derek rested his hand over Renee's and let the steady hum of the engines wash over them. It was the sound of legacy, calm, constant, unstoppable. Because in the end, power wasn't about titles or contracts. It was about building something so fair that it no longer needed defending. The Colemans had done that. They had turned pain into policy, humiliation into reform, and silence into the kind of truth that echoes long after the noise fades. Somewhere between the clouds, Derek thought of his mother again, of the night she'd been forced to sleep in an airport chair while strangers looked away. "We made it, Mom," he whispered. "We made it all the way." And the sky, endless and weightless, answered back in silence, the same kind of silence that had once hurt, now transformed into peace. The kind that no one could ever take from them again.